Hello and welcome back to the conversion of Granny Grumman. In this episode, I'll finally be putting the 1973 Chevy 292 back in the van. Most of the parts are painted, prepped, and ready to go, but some still need to be cleaned up. First thing on the list is the mechanical fuel pump. The next thing to go on are the engine mounts. And here I'm installing some brand new lower and upper alternator brackets, followed by the alternator. Next, I'll install the pulley and the fan on the water pump. Up next is the lower thermostat housing, the thermostat, the upper thermostat housing, and a small hose that connects the water pump to the lower housing. Up next is the harmonic balancer. Everything was torqued to spec on the engine, but much of it was done off camera in interest of saving time. Up next is the shiny new Edelbrock valve cover. Right here you'll see me join the intake and exhaust manifold, then install it on the head. Here you'll see me clean up the carburetor cosmetically, as it didn't seem to have any running issues when it was on the engine before. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Next up is the air filter. And on goes the throttle linkage. Next is the fuel line that connects the mechanical fuel pump to the carburetor. The next steps will be cleaning the engine bay, the bell housing, the transmission, and painting them. And here I'm taping down some old newspaper just so I don't get any overspray on the nice exterior paint. Before painting the transmission, I need to replace a few seals. And like an idiot, I left the rag inside the transmission, but luckily noticed my mistake and pulled it out from the other side. Now with all the major components cleaned, sealed, painted, and cured, we're almost ready to install the engine back in Granny Grumman. The next step is to clean up the distributor. I'm converting it to electronic ignition using the Pertronix kit, so I'll be removing the points, condenser, and the base plate. This worn out cam, which opens and closes the points, may be why we had a rough running condition. We won't have that issue anymore with the Pertronix kit. With the Pertronix kit, you take a magnet ring and you place it over the original cam, and the magnet inside that ring will pass this pickup, telling the spark plugs when to fire. The kit comes with this little plastic feeler to make sure that there's an adequate gap between the magnet and the pickup. Next up is the ignition coil. And finally, the starter motor. Just gotta push the van back in the garage to get it ready to drop the engine in. Here you'll see me using a puller connected to a slide hammer to remove the original brass bushing to replace it for a needle bearing. And back on goes the freshly machined flywheel. Next up is the clutch and the alignment tool and the pressure plate. And here comes the bell housing. And now slowly but surely, I'll inch the engine back into the engine bay. And next is the transmission. And next, I'll prime the oil pump with a drill. The next step was mechanically timing the engine at 4 degrees before top dead center, then wiring up all the spark plug wires in the exact firing order found on the intake manifold. Next up is a brand new aluminum radiator. Right here I'm removing the upper thermostat housing as well as the thermostat so that I can fill the engine with coolant. I do it this way so that there's no air bubble in the engine and I don't have to prime the system. Now that everything is temporarily wired up and there's oil and coolant in the engine as well as a temporary exhaust run, we're ready to fire the engine off. After adjusting the timing with the timing light, it finally idled smoothly. The next task was to handle all the wiring that goes to the engine. I began by pinning everything out as best I could, then hooking it up loose just to make sure it functioned properly. And once everything tested okay, I insulated the wires. Right here you'll see me take off the steering wheel so I can replace the failed turn signal switch, which literally broke apart in my hands. The next step was to attach the drive shaft and then finally take it for a short little drive. After the initial test drive, I sealed up some exhaust leaks, tuned the carb, and this is what she sounds like. Getting the driveline back into Granny Grumman was no easy task, but I couldn't be happier with the results. I've repaired a lot of vehicles over the years, but this is by far the biggest project I've ever taken on. Now that the driveline is back in Granny Grumman, I can finally move on to other parts of the project. Stay tuned as I overhaul the lighting, electrical, the brakes, replace the tires, and then finally begin the conversion process of the inside of Granny Grumman. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram for play-by-play updates, and I'll see you next time on the conversion of Granny Grumman.